when people talk, listen, man, I'm going to raise that red flag.
This narrative, especially after 1 year, one bad year, it's one big splash move. And because I don't think people understand how much cap space we can create.
Alex, I want to ask you, because you're a very humble person.
And I'm never going to be right about anything.
Yeah.
I was right.
What's up, y'all? I'm back again. I really hope that this comes out okay because my headphones died and you might get an echo, but post-production, there is less echoes as far as you can remove sound and yada, yada, yada. So let's just fingers crossed. So I am looking at 4 ways to try and objectively kind of get across points of why I believe the Panthers are better than how we think they are and why the average person doesn't understand this. The problem is it's a lot of it is very nuanced or subjective mostly because of injuries, and I'll get to that. So what I did, and I do this every year because most people look to PFF. And I like using PFF as a tool, but the problem is that I can't jump between things for like a very specific point because you don't stay objective. You kind of like you can show that you are searching for very specific arguments to enhance your argument. So what I did is before I looked at any PFF grades, I decided that I would go to the division and I'm going to create the overall roster that we're about to go into with this season that we're about to go into with the PFF grades from the previous year, including the new free agents. Like I included like Morig, I included like Wharton, yada, yada, yada. It's the same thing for every other team. So the way I did it is I said, let me look for the PFF grade for one quarterback, not for the quarterback room, because in theory, if you lose your quarterback, you're not going to be good anyways. So it doesn't matter. So the one quarterback, which their PFF grade, and then everyone below that, I added an extra person, right? Because in theory, there's rotations in the lineup. And I did that for everything except offensive line, because I'm not going to. There isn't a ton of grades because most of these teams don't get for example, Icky and Moten were the only ones that really played offensive tackle as far as that had the ability to be graded. So for wide receivers, you can have 4 wide receivers on the field at a time. That happens. So I grade based on 5 wide receivers. You can have 1 running back in the field. I grade on the top 2 running backs. You have, in theory, 3 interior defensive linemen on the field. I grade on 4 defensive linemen. That kind of thing. So I went through every team, and I got the best grades for those specific people. And I did it based on the minimum that PFF allows to get graded. Like Derek Brown played 1 game, but he didn't get graded, so he doesn't count towards the grading system. And the reason I did that is because we don't know how they're going to come back. So I can't accurately give them a grade or give them any kind of points for coming back because I just don't know how it's going to be. The same way with Rashid Shaheed, the same way with Godwin. I just don't know how they're going to come back, so I can't accurately predict their PFF grade. So I went through the people that actually met that standard. So if you didn't have enough people to meet the standard of 2 running, say for example, New Orleans doesn't have 2 running backs that had the ability to be graded. They don't have that many guys in the room that had enough snaps to be graded. I drop you a spot. So say Kamara is the best running back, but there's only 1 person in that room. Then he drops to 2nd. New Orleans drops to 2nd in the running back room. For rookies, what I did was, because I'm using PFF, I go to their draft position. So say, for example, Ted. Ted is the #1 ranked wide receiver in PFF. So I go to the wide receiver of the rookie class the previous year who finished wide receiver 1 by PFF standards. So for Ted, I believe he comps to Malik Neighbors as far as PFF. So I use whatever the number is for Neighbors PFF. So like Booker, I think he's 3, so I think he's compared to Brian Thomas Jr.'s PFF score, that sort of thing. That's how I identified that. And I used, because I wanted to use all PFF because I wanted to be as objective as possible. And I wanted to make those points before I even started looking at these things. So I'm not going to go one by one by one. I'm just going to tell you overall how it played out. I'm not even going to go position, but I'm going to give you the positions. So the positions were quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, interior offensive line, offensive tackles, interior defensive line, edge, middle linebackers, cornerbacks, and safeties. Like I said, I only graded 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 5 wide receivers, 2 tight ends, 3 interior offensive line, 3 exterior as far as tackles, unless your 2 stayed healthy the whole season. Then I only gave you 2, and I didn't deduct anything for that. Your interior defensive line, I graded 4. Your edges, because in theory they're edge, I graded 3 because you had an extra one. Linebackers, in theory you have at most 2 on the field at the same time, so I graded 3. Cornerbacks, usually you have 2, I graded 3. Safeties, a lot of the times you have 2 safeties on the field at a time, so I graded 3. So I know that's complicated. Let me just get to the actual results. As far as teams that had the highest scores amongst those positions, Tampa Bay had 6 of the 11. New Orleans had 3. Carolina had 1, and Atlanta had 1. Who had the second most was Atlanta had 6, Carolina had 4, Tampa Bay had 1, and New Orleans had 0. Third, Atlanta had 4, Carolina had 3, Tampa Bay had 2, and New Orleans had 2. And fourth, New Orleans had 6, Carolina had 3, and Tampa Bay had 2. So I make this point because obviously, if you follow along with that, it looks like Tampa Bay has the best overall roster. Atlanta has the second best. Carolina has the third best. And New Orleans has the 4th best. So I'm looking at the predictions of rosters going into 2025. I'm using PFF again. So PFF has the 11th best roster as Tampa Bay, the 15th as Atlanta, the 25th as Carolina, and the 30th as New Orleans. So at the very base, that makes a ton of sense, right? Because I just told you who was first, who was second, who was third, and who was fourth. You kind of followed along. So that makes sense if they're just very black and white of this is how their rosters were previous year based on all of the data put together, and this is the following year. Now, here's the overall problem with being so black and white about it, and this is the reason why it's so hard to have these conversations with people, is because they will look to things like this, things like PFF that shows specifically the on-field production. So the problem is I'm just talking about Carolina's point of view. So actually, let me talk about, let's just talk about Tampa Bay's point of view beforehand. So Tampa Bay lost Godwin, and Godwin's coming back. We don't know how he's going to be. But he still has had enough snaps to equate to this number. He was 10th in PFF scores for 2023. So we were able to use that number for Godwin. Derek Brown got hurt game 1, so we weren't able to use Derek Brown. They're both coming back. Godwin had a dislocated ankle. Derek Brown had a torn meniscus the first game of the season. I don't know if you've had a torn meniscus before. I have. I came back in a month. Now, I tore my ACL, and it took a long time to come back from that. But we should expect Derek Brown to come back, right? So the problem with us only using that black and white data is that, one, we don't get to include Derek Brown in that. 2, we forced our entire defensive line to play out of position. So our defensive line fell to 3rd best. And so you got to assume that putting Derek Brown back is only going to make that better. Same with Panthers trading Deontay Johnson and Mingo. It forced guys like Xavier Legette to go into a position that he wasn't ready for. It obviously put that receiver group down. So that wide receiver number doesn't really overall affect what the actual room looks like. Coker might have started playing before he ever wanted to. Adam Thielen had some games where he was hobbled. Excel was playing with a broken wrist. So there's nuances in these positions. And we still have the 2nd best, according to PFF, receiving room, even with all of that. So that can adjust going up. Same with tight end room. Sanders had to play tight end 1 right away because Trimble couldn't play. Our defensive end room, Wanham had to miss the first part of the season. So a lot of guys had to play that weren't ready to play or that didn't think they had to play in those positions. Cornerback is the same way. A lot of those scores were overall scores that the lowest part of those scores were from, those early games where they weren't expecting to play. Granted, that can be said with all these other teams as well. Now let's get to that. So here's the overall problem with grading teams based on their production the previous year. I went to adjusted games lost. Because I think it's a Barnwell created this, or Barnwell and some analytics guys created this, but it's pretty good. It does all these calculations to show who the most injured team was by different criteria, based on premium positions, based on how early in the season they got hurt, based on the type of injury. I think there's like 300 different data points that they use to figure out adjusted games lost. Now, Carolina was 30th most injured team in their adjusted games lost. And in the division, Atlanta was the 4th healthiest. They're the 4th healthiest team. So if you think that they're 2nd, based on all these guys that they're bringing back, that I don't think that they lost anyone that would have affected their PFF score for anything. They were the 4th healthiest team, still didn't make the playoffs, and lost to Carolina at the end of the year, who was the 30th healthiest team. So in order, San Francisco was the most injured as far as adjusted games lost. Las Vegas was 31st, and we were 30th. Most of the PFF will excuse injuries. For example, the 49ers, I believe, won one more game than the Panthers, and they had the 32nd healthiest team, and they come in as the 18th best roster because they understand what the 49ers were before. But here's the big problem. The big problem is they don't do it in reverse. So think about the teams that came out of nowhere this year. One, the Commanders. The Commanders were the 5th healthiest team, and they made the NFC Championship game. They are now, by PFF standard, the 6th best roster. Same with Denver. The Denver Broncos came out of nowhere, and they were the 6th most healthiest team. And they have the 9th best roster according to PFF. The Minnesota Vikings had the 10th most healthy team, and they're the 8th best roster with a rookie quarterback that's coming off injury. So they obviously what they're doing is they are sticking to very black and white data without considering the nuances of the prior year. So let's look at the teams as far as the most injured teams that ended up making the playoffs. So San Francisco was the most injured team, no playoffs. Vegas, no playoffs. Carolina, no playoffs. New Orleans, no playoffs. Miami, no playoffs. Cleveland, who was a playoff team the year before, no playoffs. Arizona, no playoffs. Detroit, 25th most injured team. They did make the playoffs. New England didn't make the playoffs. The Rams, 23rd most injured team, did make the playoffs. Indianapolis didn't. Houston did as a 21st most injured team. And Jets didn't and Dallas didn't, who made the playoffs the year before. So 3 of the 14 most injured teams made the playoffs. So obviously, we know the more hurt you are, the less likely you make the playoffs. Because only 3 of the bottom 14 made it. Now let's look at who did win. Philadelphia won the Super Bowl. They were the 2nd healthiest team. They got destroyed by the Tampa Bay last year when they were the 23rd healthiest team. Now, is it something that they did to their roster? They did add Saquon Barkley, but pretty much they were the 23rd They were 23rd as far as health, and they were 2nd this year. Buffalo was one of the last 4 standing. They were 8th. Washington was 5th, and Kansas City was 14th. So Kansas City basically was just there because they're Kansas City. They're that good. And Baltimore was one of the final 8 standing, and they were number 1 as far as health. Health matters. And just in case you don't think that, the year before, San Francisco and Kansas City were in the Super Bowl. San Francisco was the 4th most healthy team, and Kansas City was the 6th most healthy team. So, let's take that number and add it to our division. So we said that Tampa Bay was number 1, Atlanta was number 2, Carolina was number 3, and New Orleans was number 4. Well, Carolina was 30th most healthy team this past year and 31st the year before. New Orleans was 29th this year and 5th the year before, which is why they went 9-8 and still didn't make the playoffs. Tampa Bay was 17th this year, which is probably why they got bounced early. And they were 9th last year. And Atlanta was 4th this year and 11th the year before, as far as health. So in our division overall, until New Orleans started getting destroyed by injuries with, Olave concussion, Shaheed injury, offensive line had a bunch of injuries. And they're going to keep having injuries because they're pretty old and they're pretty they don't have a lot of depth, mostly because of their cap situation. So let's take this data and let's look at our schedule and who we played and who we beat. We played New Orleans before they had any injuries the first game, and we lost. We played the Chargers, who were the 11th most healthy team, and we lost. We beat the Vegas Raiders, who were the 31st most healthy team. Seems right. We lost to the 15th most healthy team in Cincinnati, the 3rd most healthy team in Bears, 4th Atlanta, 5th Washington, 6th Denver. We beat the 29th Saints. We beat the 13th Giants. We lost to the 14th Chiefs, the 17th Bucks, the 2nd Eagles, the 19th Cowboys. We beat the 26th Arizona Cardinals. We lost to the 17th Bucks, and we beat the 4th Falcons. Now, let's go even further for this. So, we know New Orleans is probably going to get injured this year. Just because, based on age. Carolina got younger, and they got deeper. It's probably not going to matter as much for Carolina this year, but we were 31st 2023, 30th in 2024. We changed our whole health staff. Our whole I don't know what you call the staff, but the basically keep your players healthy staff. We changed them all over, and then this past year we played the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th most healthy team. We beat Atlanta, the 4th most healthy team, when we're the 30th. And we beat them. Now, what if we're just as healthy as Atlanta? Or what if they catch an injury bug? Like this stuff flows. It ebbs and flows. It's not like we're gonna be the most hurt team forever. Hopefully. If we're in the bottom 3 again this year, we gotta start talking to Tepper about conditions, because that ain't great. And then Tampa Bay, 32-year-old Mike Evans, 30-year-old Baker, and you got Vita Vea, who's older, and Panthers just got a lot younger. So if we know we can beat Atlanta when they're the 4th healthiest team, we're the 30th, and we know that we were a Chuba fumble away from beating Tampa Bay, and they're getting pretty old. And we know we beat New Orleans when they started getting hurt, and it ain't going to slow down anytime soon. And we know we're getting healthy, and we're better and deeper. That's the nuances that people aren't talking about. And what they are talking about is exactly what happened last year, except they forgive the teams that overperformed, or some of the teams that got super killed by injury, but they were good the year prior. The problem with the Panthers is that we haven't shown that we can be good, because we have 2 straight years of being the top 3 most injured teams in the league. So objectively, as Panther fans, if nothing else changed, if you think that we didn't get better at all, we're a 5-win team, unless somehow our injuries take up us to 31st or 32nd. One, because PFF said we are basically the 8th worst team, which we picked 8th this year, so we had 5 wins. And because that only happens when we're the 30th worst team, which happened last year. So that's why the optimism needs to be there. If it changes, if it flips, and we don't have to deal with Austin Corbett getting injured for the entire year, but even if he does, now Cade Mays and Brady Christensen, and we just got Luke Condra, got a lot of depth there. We don't have to deal with Shaq Thompson. He's not there. But now we have a year for Wallace, and we brought Rose Boom in. And in theory, they bring somebody else in. Now, if we lose Derek Brown, we bring in Wharton. We brought in Bobby Brown. We drafted Cam Jackson. There's a lot more depth there. So we can take those hits like we couldn't last year. We lose a receiver. We brought in T-Mac. We brought in Horn. We brought in Hunter Renfro. We gave guaranteed contract to Jacoby George. And from all I'm seeing is that he's not done. And if you take this list and you add a Blackman to it, or Jalen Ramsey, or Rasul Douglas, and we're no longer the 4th best cornerback room, then even the PFF grades ain't looking too much different from Atlanta and Tampa Bay. I hope that made sense. I'm just trying to get Panthers fans to think outside of the box instead of falling into the trap that PFF does to itself, where it just uses previous year's data to project how good teams are going to be the following year. And they don't consider the nuances because it's an algorithm. I understand. It's an algorithm. It's not, you don't use, because you can't quantify some of this stuff. So it takes the human element, but when you invite the human element, then you start, making your own narrative and forcing your own narrative upon it. I'm not trying to force a narrative. I'm just trying to say, think about just the absolute bottom that PFF has for us, and then understand that we were real unlucky last year. And all the unluckiness that happened, if that happens again, the depth that's added should by itself make us better than a 5-win team. So I would never, ever, ever have 5 wins as the floor for this team. I think probably 7 is probably the floor. But I think the ceiling is pretty high because all the flaws that happened last year, as far as the luck. Like I said, we played the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth most healthy teams. Probably won't win again. All right, thanks for listening. Until next time, peace.